All right, let's dive into something that's, well, it's both the most familiar thing in the universe and the most mysterious. We're talking about consciousness. What is it, and why is it so incredibly hard to pin down?
And this quote from the philosopher David Chalmers it nails it, doesn't it? There is nothing that we know more intimately than conscious experience, but there is nothing that is harder to explain. I mean, think about it. Nothing is more real to you than what you're seeing, what you're hearing right this second. And yet, that very closeness, that intimacy, is what makes it such a ghost for science to capture.
This really is the big one, isn't it? Why does it feel like something to be alive? It's not just that your brain is a super fancy computer processing all this data. The real puzzle, the deep mystery, is why all that number crunching has this inner movie playing alongside it, this subjective feeling. Why isn't it all just happening in the dark, with no one home to watch the show?
Okay, so to really grasp what makes the hard problems so hard, we first got to look at what Chalmers calls the easy problems. And, easy is in quotes for a reason. They're incredibly complex, but they're the kinds of problems that science is actually really good at tackling. So what are we talking about here? Things like reacting to stuff, right? Pulling your hand away from a hot stove. Or integrating information, like when you see a ball flying at you and you just catch it. Reporting what you're thinking, focusing your attention, controlling your body, even just falling asleep and waking up. These are all about function. They're about what the brain does. And you can totally see how, with enough time and research, we could map out the exact brain circuits for every single one of them. But, and this is the big but, here's where things get weird. Let's say we did it. Let's say we solved all of those easy problems. We have a perfect, complete map of how the brain does everything it does. Even then, we're still left staring at this huge, gaping mystery. And that mystery is subjective experience. It's the what it is like quality, the inner life. It's not just about your brain being able to tell the difference between light waves. It's about the actual experience of seeing the color red, the raw feeling of a burn, not just the reflex that pulls your hand away. It's the private show that's only playing for you. So let's break it down. The easy problems are all about function. They're asking, how does the brain do X, Y, and Z? But the hard problem, it's asking something completely different. It's asking, why does all that brain work feel like anything from the inside? See the difference? It's about functionality versus experience. And here's the kicker. Chalmers argues that this isn't just a case of, oh, we just need more data, or we'll figure it out eventually with better brain scanners. Nope. He calls it the explanatory gap. It's like we're trying to measure the color red with a ruler. Our tools, our entire scientific method, might be fundamentally mismatched for the question we're asking. Okay, let's make this super concrete. Imagine you're looking at a red apple. Science can trace that whole process, right? Light hits your eye, signals zap down your optic nerve, different parts of your brain light up, and eventually you can say, hey, that's a red apple. The functional explanation is perfect, it's complete. But after all of that, we still have to ask, why does that whole chain of events produce the internal feeling of redness? The science of the physical process it doesn't even touch that question. And that right there is the explanatory gap. It's this massive chasm, right? On one side, you have the objective world of physical stuff, neurons firing, chemicals reacting. We can measure all that. On the other side, you have your subjective, first-person world of what it feels like to be you. It's like our science is perfectly equipped to map one side of the canyon, but it has no bridge to get to the other. And look, this isn't just some abstract thing philosophers worry about. Top neuroscientists like Christoph Koch are wrestling with this too. He basically said, you know what, let's just forget about the subjective feelings for now, because our current way of doing science might not even have a solution for that. That's a huge admission. So what now? If the usual methods aren't working, do we just throw in the towel? Chalmers says, absolutely not. What we need, he argues, is a totally new way of thinking, a radical new approach, one that stops trying to explain consciousness away and instead starts taking experience seriously. And this approach is called a non-reductive explanation. Now, what does that mean? Well, usually in science, we explain things by breaking them down into smaller bits, right? A living cell is made of molecules, molecules are made of atoms, and so on. That's reductionism. But Chalmers is saying, hey, maybe that just doesn't work for consciousness. Maybe instead of trying to break experience down into something it's not, we need to accept it as something new and fundamental. And this is where it gets really wild. Here's his big idea. What if experience isn't something that just magically pops into existence when you get a complicated enough brain? What if experience is a fundamental property of the universe, just like space-time or mass or electrical charge, a basic ingredient of reality itself? I mean, think about it. Physicists don't waste time trying to explain why mass exists. They just accept that it does. They treat it as fundamental, and then they get to work figuring out the laws that govern it, like gravity. Chalmers is saying let's do the same thing for experience. Let's stop trying to explain it away, let's accept it's a fundamental property, and start a new science to discover the laws that connect it to everything else. Okay, so if we accept this, if experience is fundamental, then the next big question is, what does it link to? What does it stick to in the physical world? And this, my friends, is where we get to the most mind-bending part of the whole theory. Chalmers suggests a deep, deep connection between consciousness and information. He calls it the double aspect theory of information. The idea is that information is like a coin with two sides. On one side, you have the physical aspect, zeros and ones in a computer, or the neurons firing in your brain. That's the stuff we can measure. But on the other side, the theory says, there's a phenomenal aspect, an inner side, a tiny little spark of what it's likeness. Experience, in other words, is the inner life of information. Now, this is a really powerful idea. It could explain why our experience is so incredibly rich and detailed, because it's just reflecting the insane complexity of the information being processed in our brains. It also helps explain why any system with the same organization would have the same experience. But this leads to a pretty shocking conclusion. If experience is tied to information, then wherever you find information being processed, you should find some tiny, tiny bit of experience. Which brings us to the final, absolutely mind-bending question that Chalmers himself puts on the table. If the complex information processing in our brains creates our complex inner world, what about a really simple system, like, say, a thermostat? It processes one simple bit of information. Is it too hot or too cold? Could a thermostat have some incredibly simple, tiny flicker of experience to go along with that? The theory doesn't say yes or no, but it forces us to consider the possibility and to wonder just what kind of universe we're really living in.